Let me flourish.
Right, I'd like to welcome all the teams to the Gauteng Open Grand Final for 2017. They are opening government Team Vampire, opening opposition Team Leprechaun, closing government Team Seven, and closing opposition Team Behemoth. Let's all give them a round of applause. My panel with me, we have Arthur, Kiwe, Rangwa, and Kalej. To give them with the motion, this House believes that when doctors discover a patient has a STD, they should reveal that information to the patient's partner. I'd like to call the Prime Minister to begin today's debate.
Yeah.
It is undeniable that STDs needs to be treated. It is undeniable that the spread of STDs needs to be deterred. Today we bring to you a case that tells you we will do exactly that. And it is undeniable that doctors have the obligation to protect its patients and to protect society. Today we bring you a case that undeniably does that. Two arguments coming from opening government in today's debate and Prime Minister's speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about harms aversion and why the patient's partner has the need to know about the potential of risk. Secondly, I'm going to tell you about why doctors are principally justified to do this. And thirdly, I'm going to respond to some obvious harms responses coming from opposition voices in society in today's debate. But before any of that, some context and some mechanistic stuff. This is a debate that places itself in a context where doctors have positive confirmation as to who the partner of the patient is, right? This debate does not place itself in instances where the doctor cannot positively confirm who the patient's partner is. Too much risk in terms of privacy is evaded in that instance. So this debate places itself in an instance where for instance, civil unions, right, where we can positively confirm the partner. Doctors can even positively confirm the partner through medical history and medical background checks. But thirdly, if the patient feels comfortable enough to reveal to the doctor who his or her sexual partners are, in that instance, that positive confirmation is secured. In instances where the patient has multiple sexual partners, we will reveal the information to those sexual partners as far as we can positively confirm and track them down, right? So this debate is not about instances where we are uncertain about who the sexual partners are in that instance. So, harms aversion. And the comparative in this debate, and we must realize that this is a comparative debate. The comparative in this debate is about the protection of the privacy of the patient versus that of the patient's partner to know about the risk that is afforded to them in that instance, right? Four benefits as to why the patient needs to know and reasons why the patient needs to know. Firstly, we say that it's important for the patient's partner to know because it's important for the patient's partner to access medical assistance immediately. STI is particularly inconspicuous in tracking down in terms of symptoms, right? You can live with STIs for up to a year without knowing that you're living with an STI because the symptoms are particularly inconspicuous in that instance, right? That becomes incredibly harmful, right? We say it's particularly important in that instance for that person to get medical assistance immediately, and that can only happen through them, the doctor or the patient disclosing to the partner that, hey, you may actually be at risk of this, right? We think you need to get tested immediately. Second to that, what we say is this is important for them to know so that they can change their sexual practices and attitudes, right? Because this may be instances where the patient and the partner are sexually reckless people. If that's the case, and they've contracted this, right? We think this is shocking news to them, and this is particularly powerful in changing their sexual attitudes and sexual practices. That's to say that they're more likely after the treatment and during the treatment to behave sexually safe in that instance, right? We say that's particularly important in deterring the spread of STIs in that instance. Third to that, what we tell you is that this is important for them to know in instances where they clearly have to opt out of this relationship because this may be a toxic and harmful relationship in the instance where one partner is particularly sexually reckless, right? If that's the case, then the partner needs to know so that the partner can decide whether or not they choose to be with a person who's clearly sexually reckless and has no imperative of changing their sexual behavior, right? That's particularly important because in instances where they do not know this information, information. They may stay in a relationship that may get them diseases to a harsher degree, such as the full contraction of HIV and AIDS in that instance. We say that's particularly harmful to prevent in that instance. And fourth to this, and this is particularly important, we say this removes the taboo around sexually transmitted diseases and the discourse around that. Because people with sexually transmitted diseases, particularly women, are thought to be as sexually reckless. We must recognize that women, I'll take it just now, but we must recognize that women and sexually transmitted diseases are not always contracted through sexual intercourse, right? You may just use a dirty toilet and contract a sexually transmitted disease, right? We say the narrative of backlash and stigma that comes from that is particularly important. When we're in position where we emphasize the importance of treating and preventing STIs, we remove the taboo. That's to say that we can now have open conversations about sexual intercourse, sexual behavior, and how to prevent that. We say that discourse is particularly important. Poppy.
So we necessarily don't understand because everything you've told us up to so far is done under the status quo. Why do we necessarily need doctors to intervene?
So this is the dynamic of relationship, and this is particularly what they don't understand of stigma, right? Women and men are less likely to disclose to their female partners about contracting an STI or an STD, particularly because they have the fear that that person may opt out of the relationship or think that they're promiscuous, right? Women in particular are very wary of disclosing the information about contracting an STI to their male partners, particularly because in a patriarchal society, they fear that the backlash might be calling them a bitch, calling them a hoe, and all of those social narratives that are harmful, right? In this instance, we then say it's particularly important for the doctors to be able to disclose this information, right? Even if the patient asks the doctor not to. So here's the analysis for why doctors are principally justified to do this, right? First instance, and there's three justifications. The first justification is that doctors have a primary obligation to protect their patient. In instances where the patient contracts a STI, gets treated for it, and it goes away, they go back into a sexual relationship where they may contract the same disease from their partners, right? If the partners go untreated. Specifically because I already pointed out to you that this is a disease and an infection that's particularly inconspicuous in picking up, given that the symptoms are so vague to it, right? They may opt back into a relationship where they can recontract that. So in order to prevent the reinfection of sexually transmitted diseases, doctors need to disclose this information to primarily protect their patients. Secondly, this is an incredibly emotional decision for the patient to make in that instance, right? That's to say, patients are less likely to make rational decisions based on the emotion involved in that, right? We tell you doctors are rational actors in this instance, and that's important. The backlash that comes from opposition voices in society is that this will deter people from getting tested for STIs in the first instance, right? We say for shame. That's not likely to be the case because you don't always go to the doctor for an STI test specifically, right? You go to the doctor because you feel certain things changing in your body and you're not sure what it is, right? And then when the doctors examine you, they're then able to diagnose you for that, right? So you may have a certain rash or a certain itch in a certain place, and you may not know what have caused that, right? And the doctors are able to tell you that. So we don't think it averts people from getting tested. We're incredibly proud to do
Rashes or itches, guys? What's up? Yeah.
The House thanks the Speaker report on the leader of
It's like press it and to pause.
This one goes out to all the fuckboys, the side chicks, and the players. I know we may have had a fun weekend right now. I know Nationals might have been fun earlier this year. But everyone, always, please get tested. please wear protection. It's not safe out here in the streets. You can't trust your partner. So today I'm going to be telling you about three things, actually two things. First of all, utility, and second of all, privacy, right? And because utility basically completely clashes entirely with everything Oliver has told us, I'll only have one tiny piece of rebuttal to his point of, well, they're going to contract the STI again, and therefore it's better if their partner knows. We say already in the current status quo, what happens is you get counseling before, during, and after treatment, which means if that doesn't get into your mind, that your partner gave you an STD, we're not sure how giving that information to another person will, right? Because we've already given you all the information you need. We've already given you all the information you need to know to say, this is how you contracted it probably. This is how you stop it. This is how you don't get it again. We don't think that the contraction is important. But now to my main point of utility, and this is essentially on the practicalities, right? Because what everyone in this debate wants is for more people to know their status so that more people can get tested and can get cured. So now what happens, right? Because Oliver says that, well, you might not be coming to get a specific STD, test. We say even if you're not, if you have a weird scratch somewhere, you're less likely to test that also if you think it's an STD that can get disclosed, right? We think that if you have even the slightest worry that it's an STD that can just get back to your partner, which means your partner will leave you because you've been fucking around. We say that then you're less likely to get tested for anything at all, right? We say that this is bad for utility. But furthermore, we'd say that even if this fuckboy does end up getting tested, we'd say that they won't disclose every single one of their side checks, right? Which means that the people that we really care about, the people that we want to get tested still aren't getting tested because we don't know about everyone, right? We don't know about who it is. But this is specifically problematic for that per side chick who thinks that she's the main chick and therefore thinks she doesn't need to be tested because her partner is getting tested next week and she knows that the doctor will tell her if he has an STD, right? If she's not the side chick and therefore her partner has not disclosed her as one of his partners because he's embarrassed, because she's kind of ratchet, he doesn't know why he went there in the first place. We say that this woman is, I'm being very heteronormative. But we say that this partner is very much less likely to go and get tested because they know it's fine. The doctor will tell me because my man is faithful to me and she'll tell the doctor that we're having sex. We say that this lady is then less likely to get tested. Martina.
Okay, so here's the problem with your argumentation, Naomi, right? You're perceiving that individuals don't get tested on regular. Even if they didn't, Naomi, if those doctors tell them, you maximize the utility that you're advocating for the third parties that don't know about the existence of that STI.
If they get tested on the regular, as you'd like us to believe, then we don't need this motion anyway. We don't get tested anyway. We say that this third party inevitably needs to get tested and needs to know by their own doctor, right? Because Frank will be talking about this more. But what happens when you get tested for an STD is you just don't go in there saying, I think I have chlamydia. They go in there, they're extensive, and they say, okay, these are the varying kinds of things you can get. This is how you might have gotten it. This is how you treat it. We say that this kind of full process is significantly better than just having a phone call from a doctor saying, yo, you have crabs, sucks. Right? I'll speak more about this anyway. So now let me tell you about but now let me tell you about my second point of privacy, right? Because we get here from Oliver that it doesn't incur doctor-patient confidentiality, but we say that because this is so inherent to the medical profession, it's inherently important that we keep this kind of doctrine safe. Why? Because trust in doctors is inherently important, because if the doctor doesn't have full information about what's happening in your life, what's going on, then they can't treat you sufficiently. Now then what happens when you put even the littlest hole in doctor-patient confidentiality? We then get the situation where patients no longer trust their doctors in the same way they did, right? Which means they're more likely to not disclose everything, which means they're less likely to say, yeah, by the way, there was also this Indian guy on the weekend. I don't know how that happened, but if there's anything specific I need to get tested for that, please let me know also, right? Because now, because that can be disclosed, because they feel like that information is going to get back to their partner, we think that it takes away the trust in the medical profession as a whole. Oliver.
Yeah, look, you're completely missing the context of this debate, right? All the problems you want to solve clearly are incredibly tough to solve. We place this debate in an instance where we can solve problems to a marginal utility, such as that where we have positive confirmation of who the partner is. Deal with the context.
Oliver, if you have this really nice guy that knows his partner and thinks that it's important for their partner to know about their status anyway, they'll know about their status, right? This has to be confined specifically to people who aren't going to disclose their partners, who aren't going to tell their partners everything, because that partner will get tested anyway when they come home and say, honey, I'm really sorry, I got chlamydia. We say that this isn't for the truthful person, because the truthful person will tell their partner anyway, and therefore it's redundant if that's what you want to talk about in this debate.
For shame.
Right? No, not for shame. Get tested if your partner says you should get tested, right? Like we see why it's so important to have this trust in doctors in a kind of example of abortion, where you don't need to tell your partner, you don't even need to tell your parents if you're underage when you get an abortion, because we realize that the medical petition, specifically when dealing with sensitive subjects such as sex, such as your personal life and intimacy, has that obligation to do everything in its power to make sure you tell them everything you can, right? And this is inherently devalued when you tell a 16-year-old girl that she needs consent from her parents to get an abortion. This is inherently devalued when you tell any patient that what you say to me is not just between us, it's between us and anyone you've ever had sex with. We think that this is the issue. We think this motion must fall.
The House thanks the Speaker upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when Naomi mentioned one of the STIs that are common, which is called creeps, there was an awkward chuckle in the room. This is because of how we perceive STIs, right? Those awkward chuckles are indicative of societies and the stigmas that exist. It means that I'm unable to discuss and mention it like any other word without arousing a certain reaction in society. It means I'm unable to tell my partner, I don't have the right space to tell my mother, I don't have the right space to tell my previous lovers, even one. That means that in the current status quo, there exists no discourse to tell your lovers that this is what I'm sick with, right? Under our world, right, you have some element of discourse because the doctors breaks that chain, right? He breaks the chain of conversation and initiates the conversation of where the STI came from or what's the best way to remain safe in that environment. We think it's important to engage in the context in which we live. Moreover, we think it's incredibly important to engage in the context of this debate that we set as opening gun. Because we say that we want to, this policy will occur in instances where we can ascertain, in those instances where we can ascertain the partner, right? And we think that this way it happens, right? Because if we know for a fact that this is your partner, we want to tell your partner. Naomi hasn't told us why, in those instances, we shouldn't tell your partner. All she has told us that we might not know your partner, right? Yeah. In instances where you might not know your partner, we make reasonable efforts to know your partner. But mainly this debate is about where we do know your partner, and we believe they deserve to know, right? But more of responses in the positive matter that I have, right? So, I want to talk about, right, in opening up, right, this idea of why, like, our policy empowers and betters sexual reproductive health for minorities, right? Because these are the things that I care about in society, right? So firstly, right, why this betters the sexual reproductive health of women, right? Because the reality is that of STIs, things like chlamydia, things like syphilis with women, because of their sexual organs that are internalized, it's hard to detect, unlike in men, right? So most women aren't able to see that they're having an STI, unlike men, right? Like this is just how, like scientifically and biologically, that's how it works, right? In cases, in cases where they can see that I clearly have an STI, most women are very scared of going because of flight shaming that happens through the nurses, right? Women are scared even to get a pap smear, right? Which is not even an STI checking treatment test, but something that helps them, right? This goes to a certain extent how the patriarchal society, right, has mystified the women's sexual reproductive organ, right, as a no-go area, right? So that means that women invariably are less likely to test. More men usually test for STIs, right, visibly and statistically. So it means that under our model, right, when men test and we find them that they do have STIs, we're able to reach out to most women, particularly women that are in conservative relationships, that are in conservative and patriarchal societies, that are unable to access this kind of sexual sexual health access, right? So we access those type of women, right? We think that is incredibly powerful in helping and is incredibly helpful, right? But more than that, right? We want to speak about people like gays, right? Because in the nature of doctors' visits when you're testing for STI, it's incredibly invasive in the types of questions they ask. How many people have you slept with? The type of sex you engage with. Many people are uncomfortable in discussing their gay sex, which is deemed dirty in society with a doctor. They would rather not test and suffer in silence or read on the internet on the type of medication they can buy, right? Which usually doesn't help. We think under our model, right, where some gay men do go to do invariably then go, right? We're able to break the cycle of silence by introducing this piece of information to one of them that you might have an STI. Come for help at the clinic, right? We think that's incredibly important, right? Because in those communities, right, accessing health services is incredibly stigmatized, right? People, when you go to a health worker, they are not trained enough, especially particularly in South Africa, they're not trained enough to deal with like divergent sexualities, the alternative lifestyles, and the types of sex that they engage in, and the types of risk that they engage in. We think that that exclusionary culture that exists within the health system means that we are unable to access the health benefits. But under our model, when we phone you and say, you probably have an STI because your partner has, please come check in. We encourage them to come in. We encourage them to practice safe sex. We think that we break the cycle of silence. But more than that, that people that are in equal power relationships, right? Like people that have sugar daddies, people that like have in incestuous relationships, right? In those instances, those people usually, if they get an STI, they're very scared to come out, right? Because they don't want their dirty little secret to be brought out, how they got an STI and things like that. They're likely to suffer in silence, right? And the dominant factor in that relationship is likely to access medical health. This will be the sugar daddy. They're likely to access the medical health. We think this is incredibly harmful for the weaker partner in that type of relationship. So we think that we as doctors need to appeal to that particular weaker partner. We think this is important. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, would say in opening up, confidentiality is not absolute, right? And there exists legal precedents that often confidentiality is not absolute, right? There are officers of trust that exist in society that have have confidentiality. People like doctors, lawyers, accountants, psychologists, all these people, right? Any interaction that you have with them is like covered with confidentiality. But confidentiality may be pierced, right? Where in instances of imminent harm or instances of post-harm, right? If you're a psychologist and you find out that your patient wants to go shoot someone, right? You intervene, or your patient has killed someone, or is about to commit a crime. Anyway, the point is, if there's imminent harm, or if you're a lawyer or an accountant and the person is being fraudulent, right? You then break the confidentiality because you realize that the potential of the harm outweighs the value, the property value of the confidentiality, right? So we think the imminent harm here is that to yourself the potential of you reinfecting yourself by going back to the partner, interacting, and probably continuing with the same lifestyle that got you in that place in the first place. But secondly, for you like infecting your partner, we think those two are two harms and two dangers that justify the piercing of the confidentiality. We don't think it's absolute. We think it's done already in society, right? Because you externalize the harm usually to an unconsenting partner when you infect them, right, and by continually practicing unsafe sex, right? So, Mr. Speaker, what do we prove to you in opening that, right? The idea that we change the sexual attitudes that exist in society, because we're able to initiate the conversation in a one-on-one conversation with your partner, right, and tell them that you most likely need to access medical health, right? We're able to say that, you know what, come to the hospital, right? So we don't deter people. We see actually under our model, more people attending health services, right? People like gays, people like women in conservative society, and people in unequal relationship. We think because we care more about those people, we're extremely proud to propose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for on the leader role.
Uncle Frank, go.
Frankie!
Oh, you started. Where? Oh. Oh, snap. This is weird. Master Chair, we find that it's particularly sneaky and lazy of the opening government to come here and isolate this debate specifically in civil unions, right? Naomi already came up here and characterized and showed us why it's important that we concentrate the scope where it is needed, right? The fuckboys who are promiscuous and are not willing to disclose their status with the people that they're having sex with. Because in civil unions, you're in a relationship where it is imperative that you disclose your status. It is imperative that you disclose your health status. And even if you don't, it will come out eventually. The people that we are looking to conscientize are the ones who are in a promiscuous environment where they're very less likely to know their status and even know where it comes from, right? Those are the group of people that we are looking for, right? Because when 70% of people who have STDs are people below the age of 35 who are most likely single and promiscuous, we have to concentrate that debate and the urgency of this debate on that population and not those in a civil union. It is incredibly lazy of them to try and isolate it in that scope. We cannot have a debate if that's the case because this is not the right target group, right? Not taken. So we get this idea from Romeo that we've got the societal norm where people fear testing, right? And fear discussing the idea of testing for STIs, and that there's not a proper discourse, right? So what we feel is that by telling the partner who did not opt in to find out this information, who did not opt into this whole health check, right? What you're doing, you're taking away their agency to decide what they want to do with their health. And by doing that, you're further marginalizing the agency of women in the very society that you want to empower, right? And we feel that that is particularly problematic. But secondly, you're stigmatizing these diseases further, because by taking away their agency, you are taking away their agency to make and prescribe their own decisions and have their own discourse
discourse on STDs. Instead, you are telling them that don't worry, we'll take care of you. This is how you're supposed to have discourse about STDs. We find that this is particularly harmful, right? And secondly, we get this idea about how people are uncomfortable disclosing and how that is particularly problematic. We feel that it's even worse when you have to sit in a doctor's room with your WhatsApp list and then tell him who exactly you've slept with. You're much less likely to disclose who your partner is, as opposed to allowing those people to have the agency to go test for themselves. And in that instance, you're not going to accrue the benefits that this side of the house has mentioned, right? But the points that I'll be speaking about today is firstly, the importance of the ability to to have agency in terms of deciding whether you want to test or not. Secondly, why it's important that we conscientize the masses using other means. And lastly, the importance of confidentiality and why it is important particularly to the medical profession and the relationship of doctors and patients, which is something they forgot because they assume that people will forever trust doctors and will forever trust the medical profession. There is a harm in us losing that trust, right? So firstly, this whole idea not taken about the ability to consult. We have to look at the process of people testing for STDs and STIs in the first place, right? So you've got a symptom or you want to go for a regular checkup anyway. The fact of the matter is you have the agency to decide to go to the doctor and get tested. The importance of this, right, is that when you tell someone their STD status without them having the agency, they're at the peril of their emotions, right? Because the process of testing is deciding, testing, consulting, getting your results, and then more consulting along with your treatment. But instead what you'll find is that when you disclose to the person's partner without following that process where they have the urgency, you're much less likely to have that partner have a healthy and responsible sex life, right? Because I didn't decide to go get tested. It's my partner who decided to go get tested and be reckless, right? So sure, I know my status, but you know what? I didn't go through the emotional stages of having agency, so therefore I can live my life the way I want. There's a particular danger in disclosing the status to people who don't have agency, because people who don't have agency don't feel the responsibility to be responsible sexually. They feel like it's not their fault. Whereas if you allow them to make the conscious decision to get tested, these are people who will then be able to make much mature decisions because they decided to opt into that conscious. They're the ones who decided to opt in to living a much more responsible life at the end of the day. And furthermore, what we find is that when you tell the partners, right, what will happen, you could have an alternative where those partners decide to go and shame that partner, right? Because when I decide to consciously go get tested, it is my story, it is my problem. But when I realize that Oliver gave me an STD, then I'm much more likely to go out and tell the world and try and shame him for giving me the STD, right? Because it's not my agency, and will further stigmatize the idea of the discourse around STDs. This is particularly harmful. I'll take closing.
Okay, so two things. One, your argument is based on one night stands. One night stands don't count as partners. Two, you're discouraging testing in general.
The argument is not based on necessarily one night stands. It's based on the hookup culture. I could sleep with you 5 times. That still counts as promiscuity at the end of the day. You are still a partner who's at the peril of my sexual health, and that's something we have to consider. Not take it. What are you doing? So anyway, we have this idea about conscientization and the alternative mean, right? So what we have here is that when you're telling, when you have a situation where partners are being told their STD status without the consent, or without them going to test, right? People are much less likely to test. This is something that Naomi spoke about, right? The whole deterrence point, right? So what we opt for instead is when you invade the spaces of people with discourse around STD, where they are then allowed to make conscious decisions about what they want to do. So we're talking about more mobile testing stations. We're talking about medical aid testing people on the regular and not disclosing that information, right? Because when you invade people, their agency will be then pressured, and at the end of the day, it will be their decision to know their sexual health and choose what type of lifestyle they want to live, right? Because when President Zuma came along with his AIDS policy, that's the first thing he did, was increase the mobile stations, was increase education on HIV and AIDS, and what that did is that it invaded the spaces of everyday South Africans, and after Zuma's presidency, you found that more and more people were testing for HIV and AIDS, more and more people started using ARVs, and more people started being responsible with their sexual health at the end of the day. And we feel that it's particularly important when you instead invade the spaces of people and allow their agency to react to that problem, as opposed to telling people without them asking and deterring the rest of society from wanting to test. Because the last thing I want to be seen as is some guy who's carrying the clap and giving it to everyone in this room, right? And lastly, is this whole idea about the importance of confidentiality. confidentiality, right? So the importance of this at the end of the day is that doctors need to be trusted in order to have a healthy public, right? But instead what you're going to find when doctors are taking people's information and giving it to their partners is not only a deterrent from people testing, but a lack of trust between doctors. Because the most important thing in keeping a person's health in check is the ability of the individual to share information accurately with the doctor, knowing that the doctor will keep it private and treat them without telling anyone else. As soon as that information starts getting spread out, then not only, by the time I go to the doctor to get tested from the flu, I'm not going to tell him about my sexual health. I'm simply going to ask him for some Vicks, or whatever the case may be, right? So we feel it is particularly important that you have that confidentiality, because then people will trust their doctors and trust the medical profession as a whole. In terms of utility, we've completely consumed the space of this principle of utility, and under our model, only then will you have more people having a healthier sexual lifestyle we are proud to oppose.
The House thanks its Speaker. Hand over to the member of
Where's our winder?
They just took our money. Do you see them? You just dropped it.
Sorry.
So, Mr. Speaker, what we essentially don't get from the opening side of government is the sort of process that goes into being part and parcel of a partnership. And we feel like the process that goes into being part and parcel of the partnership is really important in terms of disclosure of such information. So when you decide to particularly say you're going to go into a partnership with a person and engage in sexual relations, there's like some sort of agreement that happens amongst those individuals, and we feel like that is totally essential in today's debates. But more of our debate will solely be based on like a harsh dismissal of the utopic argument that side opening opposition comes with, and we necessarily feel like the utopic argument that they come with does not fit in the context of today's debate on the basis of the fact that already as it is in South Africa, we face like the greatest HIV rates within South Africa. So you don't necessarily find individuals that are incentivized to go and actually test for such illnesses, and we feel like that's solely important. But more importantly, what we'll touch upon inside closing government is what they brought about and why that's more dangerous in today's debate. Like the existence of this sort of promiscuous activity that exists within relations, and why it's important for those partners to solely have this sort of participation, this sort of information dissemination. But more importantly, we don't get why doctors are solely important in relation towards disseminating this information. So let me give you some sort of analysis in terms of people who agreed to go into some sort of a partnership in terms of a civil union. So like if you're blacklisted and you're in a civil union, so the other party has like automatic rights to get that sort of information to say, look, homeboy has been blacklisted, so therefore he can't cop a whip on the basis of the fact that he does not necessarily have the ability to spend his money right. So we feel like when the female then has this sort of information then disseminated towards her, sit down Naomi, this sort of information disseminated towards her, then she makes more of what side opening government was speaking about, which is more of the value of information towards decision making. So they make a more conscious decision within this sort of aspect. But more importantly, what we'll tell you is that why is it essential for that person to get that sort of information after that person willingly or rather acknowledges to go into a partnership with that person. So they run this entire argument also of how hookup culture can be considered as partnership. So I get a tournament girl, right? And we have sex. We don't necessarily think that in itself can be categorized within like some sort of can be categorized within some sort of partnership. So let me tell you, with the beginning of our extension, what necessarily partnership entails and what partnership is about. So like what happens within partnership is that you take a conscious decision to allow the person to have like some sort of overlap within your privacy. So what happens is that we're going to have relations, either it be sexual or either it be emotional in this sort of instance, for you to access that sort of private element of my life that I'm trying to refrain from you or that I'm trying to keep from you. So the moment you make a conscious decision to say I'm entering into a partnership with this sort of individual, so you give away that sort of privacy that exists within your life, and you say that, look, it's cool for you to access this sort of information because you and I are willingly engaging in a partnership. So therefore, this individual consensually goes into that, or rather walks into that partnership. So the element of privacy does not exist in that point in time because it's sort of like an idea that we both agree on. Kindly sir, I'll move on, I'll take a POI later on. But more importantly, what we need to realize is that with this sort of hookup culture that's like opening opposition is speaking about, this is more reason why this sort of individuals who've totally walked into partnership but still engage in hookup partners, they need to have like that sort of information disseminated towards the partnership, which we didn't really get an analysis of in the opening half. So because this promiscuous relationship, this promiscuity then exists in like society, sit down Naomi, it exists in society. So what we then need to do is like have some sort of effective means of communication in terms of disseminating this information towards the partner. And we don't necessarily feel like because you think that more test stations will be set out, people will go and test more. But we feel that because people are actively taking a stance, like President Zuma, like DJ Swu, who publicly test and make sure that the information is disseminated in the public, we feel like the state is within itself, so like these individuals who are in the forefront of like the country, this does not necessarily become like something that is that big because we're trying to tackle this entire idea of the stigma that exists within the society. Poppy?
We think at the end of the day, those individuals just mentioned like Jacob Zuma had the choice and consented to that. You are not allowing the patient the same the choice that they have to not tell them.
This is where the consent exists between patient and doctor. Like the moment you go into a partnership with an individual, you're then saying that you're willing to give away your private life. So that's the important element that exists. So the mere fact that you're engaging in that sort of relationship with that partner, or you're involved in a partnership, you're then discarding the privacy that you have as an individual and allowing it to be given to that person who's your partner. So therefore it becomes really essential that this individual get this sort of access to information or get this information. But more importantly, I'll tell you why it's not that it's not really applicable within society whereby these individuals will publicly tell their partners. One, because like of the societal views that exist around STIs, you already have this entire mindset of saying like, look, it's really bad whether you have an STI or because you have a partner, the reason why you got an STI was because you engaged in promiscuous activity. And that's the sort of mindset that automatically comes with your partner, and they're going to think that they are automatically cheating, and you don't necessarily believe that that's the right case. Like as opening opposition, when you're using public toilets, you can sit on the sit and get chlamydia. So this sort of circumstances happen. So, but we feel that it's essential that this information is disseminated to those people. But why we think it's more critical is that you need to make more sexually aware decision in terms of that sort of activity. But last but not least, we'll tell you that because that promiscuity exists that they're speaking about, there's like this massive trust element, or rather this dishonesty that exists within society right now and right there, that happens in society. So like for basic example, what then happens in basic debate tournaments is that you get people who get information about who broke to finals before they even know, before the break is announced. So like you get this information already released, so that this massive element of dishonesty that goes on into this sort of, into society this day. So what you generally have is you have individuals, because of the societal views, who are not willingly going to disclose that sort of information because they're scared of how they'll be judged and how the stigma will be attached to them. So that's why they're not honest in the onset, and they're going to try and deal with the STI before they deal with their partner, and they're most probably going to spread the STI. And for those reasons, we think that this sort of information should be disseminated. Thank you.
And I'm not going to use it. You guys use this. All right. Thank you, Phathu, for the recycle. Still
For
not,
shame.
still not really good, but it's okay. But what really interested me the most was that if we're in a civil union, there is somehow a contract. How I let you into my privacy, everything is revealed. Me and my partner have been together since primary school, have lived for more than 8 months together, the equivalent of a civil union under South African law.
For shame.
She doesn't know everything about me, and there is nothing that really says she should know everything about me. So at the end of the day, your little penetration of privacy because it's a civil union doesn't exist. And then they said, well, there should be some sort of way to communicate to the extramarital ones and to the one-night stands and the hookup culture. Now, the problem that exists is this. Now, who is the doctor and what does the doctor do? The doctor takes you into an examination room and then he takes off the white jacket, puts on his Sherlock Holmes hat, and goes and looks for people you've slept with. Going above and beyond their duties. This is not what the doctor should do. Sit down, relax. So, they were really irrelevant. Don't recycle. Opening. I'm not going to strong on you. I'm going to show you. It's now creating this option of non-treatment, right? Because people who fear they have HIV don't go and get treated. Even worse now, I won't go and get treatment and go and get tested because they're going to tell Poppy. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take Phathu's advice, stick it in vinegar, and light a little fire on it, and the brown ooze will go away. That's how mine went away. And this is what is really dangerous. And at the end of the day, we shouldn't accept this, right? And then they say, well, we're causing stigma. We think you're causing stigma because you're specializing it. You're putting it in a little bracket, right? Because they don't tell Poppy when I'm having a heart attack. They don't tell her when I'm having TB. They don't tell her when I'm about to chop my foot off. But then you have to tell her when I have STDs. Now you're specializing it. It's something that should be told. It's something that's nice. Must be revealed to hookup culture evil. So at the end of the day, we don't think it's going to sit down, relax. Still Muri.
For shame.
And what Oliver came up and said, basically, ladies and gentlemen, is that what happens, what they're going to do, is what's happening in pre and post counseling to try and change your habits after you've been tested. So at the end of the day, they didn't show us exactly what they're going to do as. So, and then lastly, they basically say, oh yes, confidentiality can be pierced if there's imminent danger. So a psychologist can take all of their files if they're treating a pedophilic serial rapist and take them to the court without a subpoena, without any process and due process because there's imminent harm. Lies, man. You're a lawyer. Don't lie like that. Because at the end of the day, this is illegal. There must be some mechanism to get that consent. So all sit down. All of them are wrong. So let's ask, where did these laws, or where does this law that they're trying to prove come from? Does it come from a place that's objective, or does it come from a moral place? We say it comes from a moral place. And there's something that's wrong with this thing. When it comes from a moral place, it can't be objective. Because now you're taking the consent of the one and not as important, and taking the other as important. And at the end of the day, this is dangerous. Just like the law of sodomy, right? It's not an objective law. Because at the end of the day, it was a law that was seeking to get men to stop sleeping with men. And at the end of the day, today, that's why men can't get charged for rape. They get charged for sodomy. Because this law that was not objective was made and was not considered properly. We think at the end of the day, right, although you're trying to do good, this law isn't right. Because we say some actions that seem to that seek to maximize good are not right and are not legal. This is not legal, ladies and gentlemen. We should not just make a law because we're trying to be some moral nation. Sit down. So let's go to the harms, right? We think in analyzing harms, right, harms can stop if room for free and equal discussion exists. So, yeah, we should live in a utopia. That's why we're arguing to go towards it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there is room for free and equal discussion between the partners, then the government and the doctor has no room to step in. And we say that this does exist within partnerships, even hookup. So at the end of the day, we must leave it again to the consent of the person. That these people are not considering the agency between the two people in the relationship that they're involved in. Sit down. Meaningful consent, ladies and gentlemen. If now you're going to take my personal information without my meaningful consent, it is illegal under the law. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, even that law can't come and penetrate my privacy without some kind of due process. If there's no due process, because here what we're saying is that the main player is the doctor, and you're putting too much, wait man, you're putting too much onus on the doctor, too much responsibility on the doctor, and the consent is being taken away from this person, which is wrong. Yeah, say something.
Okay, so listen, Briggar, right? As a law student, I'm telling you there's a legal obligation that exists as
Sit down. There's no legal obligation that exists to abuse due process. There's no legal precedence for abuse of due process. You can't go get a subpoena. If somebody right now is in the hospital, you can't rush in and go grab files without the consent of the court. You can't. Due process must be followed. Law student, beg your failing. Right? So, also, right, we should not use the law for moral condemnation. We must use the law to alter behavior, right? And things like crime. But this is not criminal, ladies and gentlemen. Once you do this, it's wrong. If the harms then are greater that you're doing, not just to the society, but to the law in general, right? So, moving on. Yeah, you failed, man. So, we believe that the doctor doesn't have to go above and beyond. They've answered their first call to duty, do no harm, right? And at the end of the day, they must prove why they must go above and beyond, become detectives and doctors at the same time. And then also, let's analyze the relationship. Right? We think the doctor isn't going to be Mr. Romantic when they're telling you that they have, that your partner has an STD, right? When they're telling Poppy they're going down a list. So at the end of the day, it becomes emotive and could break down the relationship itself. So at the end of the day, you're breaking down the quality of relationships through doctors. The trust is going to be lost. Naomi and Bongani told you this. So at the end of the day, they must come and prove why doctors must be the third wheel in a relationship that strains relationships anyway. We think at the end of the day, right, some duties must be abstained from. Doctors must abstain from taking away privacy in their relationship with their patients, right? Because at the end of the day, one, it's illegal, but two, it hurts their practice, it hurts society, it hurts the law. They must come and prove something.
We hand over to the government.
Time. Time.
It's up to you.
Yeah, just pause it. Because it's just pause. Press the one that you talk about.
It's not a task.
Oh, is it not?
Double click.
How?
The one I'm talking about over there.
Time, please. Let's go. Let's go.
But I didn't do it. No.
So ladies and gentlemen, let me bring you some law perspective in today's debate. Something that's completely lacking in today's debate, right? When somebody willingly engages in coitus with an individual when they know they're HIV positive and they don't engage in protected sex, you're charged with rape. That's a law principle, that's law that exists in today's country. We thought an answer should extend to STIs because they're transmitted in the same way, ladies and gentlemen, right? Because somebody concedes, and the law concedes, ladies and gentlemen, that when you do that, you're willingly trying to harm a third party that isn't consenting to this, that isn't buying into this concept, ladies and gentlemen. And it's something that the entire opposite bench has completely neglected in today's debate, right? But just some concept of contextualization here, and this directly clashes with what Briggar says. For this debate's sake, let's use Briggar's example about him and Poppy, right? When Briggar gets a heart attack, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to call Poppy because Poppy must sign a consent form to say, operate on this nigga because he's about to die, right? We think that the necessity of the legal relationship that exists exists between the two of them, ladies and gentlemen, is so essential that it must be prioritized, ladies and gentlemen. And it's something they're neglecting in today's debate, right? Let's engage with Briggar and tell you why legal necessity exists, right? I'm going to bring you principles on consortium and quantum media, ladies and gentlemen. These are legal principles, right, that actually exist. No, you're doing BA, I'm doing LLB, I know what I'm doing, right? So there's such a level of consortium, ladies and gentlemen. When two individuals engage in a partnership, there's a certain level of consortium that allows them, ladies and gentlemen, to engage in this sort of communication where you can invade your privacy and know certain things about you, right? It's a legal relation that exists. We have to communicate with each other because of the existence of that consortium. And Phathu gives you extended analysis on that, ladies and gentlemen. Because of the existence of a consortium between two individuals and a partnership, ladies and gentlemen, we think that the doctor should tell that individual of the existence of an STI, ladies and gentlemen, because it's essential for that third party to know that information, right? We don't think we want to protect the partner that is wrong in a relationship. We want to protect the partner that did nothing, ladies and gentlemen. The third party who doesn't even know about the existence of that specific STI, and it's something opposite, completely neglected in today's debate. That third party is very important. That third party must be protected because they're innocent, ladies and gentlemen, right? Let's deal with this whole idea of consortium, ladies and gentlemen. Because of the legal relationship, legal operative word, ladies and gentlemen, that exists between two individuals who are partners, not one night stands, as open opposition would like you to believe, ladies and gentlemen. There's a legal relation that exists. We're not saying, hey, listen, we're going to tell all people that you've ever engaged in coitus with, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about partners in a specific relationship, which is that lacked in the opening half of this debate. A partner is somebody that you willingly consent into engaging into some sort of tangible relationship with, ladies and gentlemen. Because that individual is a partner, consortium exists with that individual, you have an obligation to communicate with them and share such information with them, right? Let me tell you what's primarily wrong, and here again, legal principle. A legal principle of quantum media, where you disgrace the dignity of your partner willingly, ladies and gentlemen, exists, where they can claim against you and they can take legal, ladies and gentlemen, legal activism, or rather take legal steps against you, right? For shaming them, ladies and gentlemen. We think this principle must extend so far as STIs. Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the concept of the perception of STIs, and this is the extension we offered you from Phathu's speech, the perception that exists that, listen, STIs are harmful, STIs are wrong, and if you have one, you're harmed in society. Because of that extension, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you quantum media, ladies and gentlemen, exists between those relationships. So we want to protect that third party. We want to stop them from infringing upon that quantum media. This is why we say that that the doctor, ladies and gentlemen, has a legal obligation to share that information, to say, hey, listen, your partner has this specific STI. We'd like you to get tested so that you get protected yourself, so that you get the necessary, ladies and gentlemen, like medication against it, right? So let's extend further on the necessity of the disclosure thereof, right? So ladies and gentlemen, we get this whole idea of chlamydia and all that stuff, right? But those aren't restricted to those specific STIs. We look at something like gonorrhea, right? We tell you you can treat gonorrhea, but you can't cure gonorrhea, right? And we think that is specifically important for those third parties that exist. We want them to get this medication as soon as possible. If you're not telling them that, hey, your partner might have given you gonorrhea and you might have to suffer for the rest of your life, we think it's harmful for that third party. And OO is going to tell you, want to maximize the utility of all actors in this principle, then neglect the third party, somebody who's innocent in this instance, some type of contractual obligation that exists, and want to protect that individual. We tell you, get that medication as soon as possible, right, ladies and gentlemen, to protect you from getting harmed by somebody who literally, willingly, ladies and gentlemen, engaged in courtship with somebody else and potentially could harm you. We think the necessity to close that information is important, ladies and gentlemen, not only for the individual being tested, because they themselves get medication, ladies and gentlemen. They get treated. We think they're protected, because the only way a doctor could know about you having an STI is because you got tested. After you get tested, they prescribe you medication to get you protected. What about the third party that you're not telling? They're not getting protection, ladies and gentlemen. They're not being prioritized. Their utility that the entire opposition bench is prioritizing isn't maximized, right? You're not prioritizing those individuals. You're not protecting them and not giving them the medication that they require, but you protect the individual who is wrong, who's in a contractual obligation that exists between the two of them. It's completely neglected by opposition in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, right? We want to protect that third party. Let's look at the whole idea of confidentiality between a patient and the doctor, right? We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that it's essential, that sometimes you break the boundaries of that, right? Which is why psychologists can protect certain individuals, because you're telling them stuff that could potentially harm a certain individual. If they believe that it's harming a certain individual, you have every right as a psychologist, as a doctor, ladies and gentlemen, to tell other people about that information and say, hey, listen, potential to do so and so and so and harm a specific individual, we think you can have every right to do that. We extend this to STIs engagement, and we think that it's like very important, right? The problem with the opposition is that they base the entire argument on this utopian society where everybody is completely honest. We say that individuals when they have STIs, they don't tell this to anybody, especially their partners, because where did you get that STI, ladies and gentlemen? For getting it quoted with somebody else, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want to tell us. Because of that nature, we want to protect those individuals and to have somebody there acting to tell those individuals and protect those individuals, right? And the sovereignty that Briggar comes up and talks to you about, we think necessarily harms the individuals that they're trying to protect, ladies and gentlemen, is because that reason we want to protect the third parties that they're neglecting, the third parties that are innocent. They're trying to protect the guilty party in today's debate, and we don't want to necessarily prioritize it, ladies and gentlemen. We tell that the nature of these relationships involves some sort of consortium and like quantum media, and we want to extend that, ladies and gentlemen, into this, right? We have the societal sticker that exists, means that the utopian argument they bring can't stand the today's debate because people aren't necessarily honest, and we want to maximize the utility of that partner, ladies and gentlemen, and the third party by getting both of them medication and protecting both of them in terms of STIs and getting both of them continued treated, ladies and gentlemen. With that, we beg to propose.
Thank you, Mafia. C-section.
The House thanks the Speaker to call upon the Chief
All of it. Sealed.
The one thing that I've learned from Martina's case is that by the time she graduates, she's going to be one hell of a good liar. Congratulations on that. But what we've heard so far from side government is absolutely a lot of stuff that can be dealt with under the current status quo. Therefore, we don't understand what legitimizes doctors to intervene in such a manner. But I'll get that once I get to my rebuttals. Essentially, what we got in terms of themes in this debate is that we got a side opposition that's telling you, one, we'll be having loss of trust in these doctors. We will have important having agencies needs to be addressed. We are marginalizing certain groups. We are stigmatizing these diseases to an even bigger point. We therefore extend on that due process is not even followed. You harm the relationship itself, therefore you don't protect anybody in that scenario. What they tell us that, well, we will have effective communication and discourse. We will have, at the end of the day, proper sexual practices. We will have, at the end of the day, principal liability of these doctors. Confidentiality is not absolute, and change of the society will happen, right? Which is basically what ran down the line. So let's get into the rebuttals. First, they tell us effective communication and discourse. We tell you, you're doing law, right? Say. We tell you at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, under their model, you harm this effective communication, this effective discourse. You are not allowing the patient to have the choice to tell the partner that this is what I have and let's see how we deal with it. We secondly think at the end of the day, you harm the relations between the discourse that happens between the doctor and the patient himself, and they don't tell us how we necessarily protect them in this instance. We think that they don't do any benefit on that. They tell us that, well, we think we will be able to get people to have proper sexual practices. We think you have pre and post counseling when you go testing, so those means you are taught on how to have proper sexual practices. It then becomes Oliver's choice if he does not want to abide by those sexual practices. Straw manning is your thing, not mine. Secondly, they tell us that, well, these people have a principled liability to act as agents to tell the patient, the lovers, right? We tell them, because of the oath that you took as a doctor, warm your seat. Because of the oath that you took as a doctor, doctor, you are in a transactional engagement with your patient and yourself, not you, the patient, and the lover at the end of the day. So you don't have a liability to tell the lover about a patient's status, right? We think that's harmful. So, then they tell us, well, confidentiality is not absolute, that we will be harming things like, because Phathu said this, that we don't have privacy once you enter civil union. We think, even though Briggar and I are in a civil union, there are certain things that I do that are private that he does not need to know and should not know, unless I make a conscious and informed consent to tell him that information, right? That under their model is necessarily harmful. Lastly, they tell us they'll change societal perceptions. We tell you that yes, you will change societal perceptions, but for the worst. Romeo tells us you have gay people who are stigmatized for the gay sex that they have. These are individuals who are afraid, first and foremost, to go and test, and now you're putting an additional burden to them that once you do test, your partner or multiple WhatsApp partners will be told about your sexuality practices. You are taking away the people's trust in the doctors to be able to be free and go and engage with the doctors in terms of their status. But Martina said, we think that's primarily problematic, right? Then what do they tell us? Who's this? Then they further on and say, well, we think it's important that doctors be involved, right? We think once you put doctors in such an instance, you are one, taking away the accountability and the responsibility of the patient themselves to be able to inform their partner. We think that's primarily problematic. Once you take away the responsibility of the patient, you are necessarily saying at the end of the day that the doctor needs to act as an agent, as a psychologist as well, to be able to protect or to put your partner at ease, right? Because of the harms that you have done, as said, because of the harms that you have done to this particular person, and we don't necessarily like that as closing government. Okay, before I go on, go.
Yeah, sure. Once again, much like Naomi, you're missing the context in which this debate places itself. This places itself in a context where the stigma prevents people from engaging in a conversation in the first instance.
Oliver, we know you're smart, but you're not that smart. The problem that you're first doing, under your model, you are creating a bigger stigma because women who feel sexually liberated and like to have sex and want to go test will be further afraid of going and doing this because once I test, I must go now and pull out my entire national list of the people that I've slept with. We don't like that in this debate. We think when you go to a doctor, you are going to this doctor because you feel free and you feel protected to be able to test without the judgment that they're putting on us, right? Then Martina comes up and she tells us about we're trying to protect the guilty and the innocent. But we tell you at the end of the day, one, first of all, you are not tried for having an STI. So how are you guilty? Secondly, we tell you, you need to follow due process at the end of the day, like my member said. They did not address additionally, nor did they clash with the harms that are brought about to the relationship itself. When you take away responsibility of the lover to be able to inform his lover that I have a disease, or for instance, said, if Briggar at the end of the day, right, goes and gets tested and does not tell me, and I have to hear this from a doctor, that creates a rift between our relationship. It creates tension between our relationship, and I'm less likely to listen and be sympathetic to his plight and his disease. I am more likely to be a bitch and try to kill him and find the bitches he slept with and kill them too, rather than listen and create this conflict between the two of us that is necessarily positive for our relationship. So what have they told us? So basically we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, under SAD government's model, we don't have effective communication, we don't create discourse, we do though continue to have a stigma onto these diseases and those who practice certain sexual practices. We tell you under our model, the doctors don't have this liability, they don't need to act as an investigator and a doctor at the same time. We think also under that, we are putting an unnecessary personal burden on these doctors, right? We think enough has been done under the status quo to protect people for sexual practices, and therefore our model stands in this debate. And in that, we are proud to oppose.
Do you think it's a diagonal?
Thank you very much, full team. If we can give the team another round of applause.